According to the documentation, basically Angular is an application design framework and development platform for creating efficient and sophisticated single-page applications. Don't worry about how formal this is. We're going to basically, throughout the duration of this workshop, dismantle what this actually means, every part of it. Basically, I'm going to start out by letting you know that Angular is a framework that is developed with TypeScript. And TypeScript is basically a superset of JavaScript that enforces types. So if you have anything that, for example, numbers that are that you want to ensure are numbers, or strings that you want to ensure are strings before they get compiled into JavaScript, TypeScript does that for you. So once you type it up and you want to let it show on the browser, TypeScript compiles to JavaScript, and you can view it like any other JavaScript file. But the browser does not understand TypeScript. So why would you use Angular? Basically, one of the biggest reasons why you would actually use Angular is because it allows you to develop single-page applications. What are single-page applications? Before, when you would want to show web pages or create a website, every page of your website is its own page served by your server. So every time that you type something inside of the Omnibox or inside of the box at the top of the Chrome or whatever web browser you use, the little text box, it would go to the server, get you a page, and serve you the HTML file with the JavaScript and CSS and everything that's associated with it. But when you're developing a single-page application, your entire application is essentially one page, and only parts of it are destroyed or created whenever you request a particular view, and you request that view based on the URL that you type in the text box at the top. Another reason why I would suggest that people use Angular is basically it allows for faster, more focused development. Why such a claim? Basically because Angular projects are extremely structured in the sense that, and you'll see, and we'll go over that now, everything has a place, from the services to the components, where you put your JavaScript files and where you put your HTML files. Everything has a logical place within the project. And a lot of these parts adhere to the single responsibility principle, which means, for example, so your HTML files only include your view. Then your CSS files only include your design elements. And your TS files, in this case, not your TypeScript files, will include all of the logic that are related to how you want, well, anything that JavaScript can do, you can do with TypeScript. So anything like event detection or display changes, anything that you want the user to interact with. Another thing that Angular is really good at is it provides a lot of functionality straight out of the box. So things that might need hundreds of lines, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like, let's say hundreds of lines of JavaScript can be done with much, much fewer lines because of the Angular out of the box, the things that Angular provides outside of the box. So some of these things are, for example, routing, but not the classic routing, which is going from page to page and requesting each page from the server, but actually the view changes that Angular uses when it routes from one view to the other. So basically the routing means the parts of the page that it destroys and creates based on the URL request that the user makes. It does something called property binding as well, which previously you would have to create those manually in JavaScript. You could just use out-of-the-box features from Angular with just a couple of lines of code, not even, because you would just write it within your HTML and you have property binding or event binding from the side of the TypeScript. And finally, another example.
Anna?
Yeah.
I think someone else is sharing his screen. Can you kindly stop sharing?
Yes. Stop sharing my screen.
No. There's a person called Juber Ahmed. You are sharing.
I'm not sharing.
Screen?
Oh no. Oh, still visible to others. Okay, hold on. Hello, there is someone sharing their screen. Can you please stop?
Can you try and share over him, or don't you? You don't have access.
Hold on, I'm gonna try something. Hello. Sorry, can you, Maria, I think because you're the host, you'll be able to do that?
Okay, here you go.
Okay. Excuse me. Can you see my screen? Hello? Okay. You can see my screen now?
Yes, it's clear.
All right, perfect. So I'm gonna present again. Where did we get? We got 2 REST calls. So previously, when you wanted to do, we were talking about the out-of-the-box features that Angular provides. We discussed routing, property binding, and I was on my way to discuss REST calls. So basically, previously, when you would want to make REST calls in JavaScript, you would use Ajax, and you would have to write the entire logic of calling the URL from like an API call or anything like that. And with the HTTP client that Angular provides, you can also do that with, no exaggeration here, a single line of code. And the last thing that I like to tell people about Angular is basically, if you are coming from, let's say, backend development with C# or Java or any object-oriented programming language, it's very easy to pick up Angular because a lot of the logic concepts behind the development within Angular are similar to the object-oriented programming. So let's say if someone wants to develop a front end and they're very used to developing APIs with object-oriented programming languages, it's very easy to make the switch. And well, it's a lot easier with Angular. So high level, what does Angular look like? Basically, Angular's most main components are modules, components, and services. And modules contain components. So every module is made up of multiple components. And you have something called the injector, which includes any service that you define within your application. To go in depth into what modules, components, and services are. Basically, components hold the logic of your application. They hold everything that you need to do. So for example, again, any event detection, any API calls that you need to make, any data that you need to retrieve, files that you need to load, you do that inside of your components. And if you have multiple components that have very similar functionality, either business-wise or just logically, you would put them inside of modules. So I like to think of it as your components are your tools and your module is your toolbox, and it just contains all of the tools that have similar functionality. So let's say, for example, you have multiple components that deal with forms. So you have a component for text boxes, you have a component for select box and radio boxes and all of these things. They all fit the same logical function. So you would put all of these inside of a module. And actually, Angular provides such a module for you called forms module or reactive forms module that you can also use out of the box. The last thing, well, not really, but one of the things as well that I want to discuss is services. And services are basically parts. They're very similar to components in the sense that you can have functionality within them, but they are reserved for functionality that will be used across multiple components and modules within your application. So let's assume that you have a financial application, and usually financial applications would require to get currencies, and you would make an API call to get the currencies. Sometimes you wouldn't make this logic of calling the API to get the currencies every single time you need to use it inside of a component, so that you don't have every component containing this kind of logic. Instead, you would just put it in a service, have that logic in just one place, and then whenever a component needs to fetch all of those currencies, it could just call the service using Angular's dependency injection. So how do all of these different parts actually interact with each other? So every component is divided into the component part, which is the logic part, and the template part, which is the classic HTML part, where you have your divs and paragraphs and headers. And the way that Angular actually understands how it needs to represent that particular component, or how it needs to handle when that component is declared, it uses something called metadata, and I'll show you where that metadata is once we actually look into the files. Basically, also the component and the template interact with each other through binding. From the template side to the component side, we use event binding. And event binding is where you detect clicks, keystrokes, or anything that the user interacts with on the application. So if you click, the template will send an event. It will emit an event to the component. The component can detect that and do whatever it needs for it. So for example, you want to submit a form on click. That's an event. The event is the click. Submit the form is something that the component will do. On the other hand, if you want the template to reflect something that is within the component, you would use something called property binding. So for example, if you have a page and it says, hello person, you have a greetings page, person will have to change depending on the name of the user who is actually visiting the page. So you would use property binding because anytime this property called name inside of component changes, you want the template to detect it. And you do that through something called property binding. Again, we have the injector on the side, and you have all of the services that are there. You don't have to define one service. You can define plenty of services within your application. And anytime you need any one of those services, you use what is called dependency injection in Angular. You get it and you use it within your component. And finally, you have the directives, which are certain keywords, I would say, that you can use within your template to make changes in the HTML itself. We're going to dig a little bit deeper in what directives are, and I'm going to introduce pipes to you. So these are Angular features that they provide for functionality that is usually very recurrent within web development. So, for example, you want to create multiple divs, or you want to show or hide something on your page. They provide things out of the box for you in the form of directives. So basically, let's take an example of a structural directive. A structural directive is something that alters the state of your HTML file. So it actually removes or adds new elements into your HTML file. In this example, we have a div called boy, and we are using the directive called ngIf. Directives are usually, directives are usually signified by the little star. So in this situation, I'm telling Angular, if boy, which in my case, boy is defined as a variable, if it is false, I want you to completely remove this div. Otherwise, I want you to create it in this place. So it's not just hiding it using CSS. It's not just a display. It is completely removing or adding the element. On the other hand, on a more visual side, you have something that is called pipes. Pipes are used, there's certain functionalities that Angular contains that help you make data more readable for your user. So instead of having dates such as the one displayed here, which is the classic way that data is usually stored in databases and the classic way that you usually receive data from an API, you just take it in, you pass it through a pipe, and you get a more visually readable output, So the good thing about pipes is that you can also chain them. So for example, if I want to have uppercase, and then I don't know why you would do uppercase and then lowercase, but you can do that. You can chain it from one to the other. You have a lot of different pipes, such as other than the date and uppercase, you have lowercase. You have the decimal pipe, which helps you also format numbers, and there are a lot more. Routing is something that we already touched on. basically it's something that Angular provides you to help you navigate between different views within your application. So you signify a particular selector. So you have div in normal HTML. You would have other types of selectors that you can name whatever you want inside of Angular. And routing helps Angular figure out that, okay, right now, this person wrote inside of the Omnibox that they want something from \home. In the background, Angular will read \home, look through a map, inside, like look through a routing map that it has, and check which component should I display inside of my router outlet, which is another component that we're going to go over. Which component should I display if I see \home? It looks within the map, it finds that component, it takes it and it puts it where the developer asked it to be displayed. So that's basically what routing means. It just is a way to map from a particular URL to a particular component with Angular. So after all of this, I'm going to just go over how you can get started with Angular development. You would need Node.js, which is a server that Angular uses to serve the application locally, because it kind of mimics the way that it might be served on a regular server. And with Node, you get NPM, which is Node Package Manager. And the Node Package Manager is used in case, for example, you want something that is pre-developed for you. You need a color picker for your application. You don't have the time or you don't want to develop it yourself. You can find a package within Node packages and you can just install it and have it, like use it inside of your application. To get started with Angular, once you've downloaded Node and you have NPM, all you have to do is npm install -g Angular CLI. npm is just the command for Node Package Manager. Install is what you're asking Node Package Manager to do for you. -g means you're installing it globally on your PC, so that whenever you want to use Angular, you can use it anywhere from any directory. And Angular CLI is the actual package that will allow you to start developing with Angular. Once you have everything downloaded, all you have to do is ng-new, the name of your application, and Angular will start creating the entire app for you from the beginning. Now, I opted out of doing this live because it involves downloading a bunch of packages, and Lebanon internet just doesn't help that much. So I pre-made this application, and we're going to go over the file structure soon. So it will create the structure for you when you do ng-new. So what would this look like for you? Once you write down the command, it'll ask you if you want to opt into Angular routing. I prefer to, but you can opt out in case you want to use different routing packages. So previously in some of my projects, I had to use something called Angular UI Router, but I highly recommend that you use Angular's out-of-the-box router because it has a lot more support, especially inside of the community. And in case you run into any trouble or anything wasn't going right, it's much easier to find help online than if you're using another package. It'll then ask you what kind of style sheet format you want to use. So if you want to use CSS, SCSS, Sass, or whatever it is that you're comfortable with, it's my choice personally to use SCSS because it's just what I got used to over the years. But it doesn't make a difference which styling format you choose. And once you've chosen all these, Angular will start making a gigantic output showing you all the files that it's creating and all of the packages that it's installing once it's installed them. And to run your application, you just navigate to that directory. Once you're in the directory, you just press ng-serve and the application is being served on localhost 4200. This is the output that you'll get. Now, here is my first app. I've already run the terminal I've run ng-serve here inside of the terminal within Visual Studio Code. And you can see over here that I am running on localhost 4200. So I'm going to show you basically what Angular out of the box, just when you create a first new application, what you get. The Angular team have developed this, what's it called, like a landing page almost of certain resources that you can use in case you want to learn something new or add something to your Angular application. You can just erase this and start again. Before we actually just make any changes and I show you how Angular detects those changes, I'm going to go over the file structure of your Angular application. So my first app, the folder that Angular created, is going to include all of these files and folders. Over here, under SRC, is just a bunch of configurations that you usually don't use that much unless you want to change something about the default configuration or default actions that Angular does. And you usually don't really look at these files. So we're not going to go over them one by one. I guess the most important file for you here is the package.json, which only reflects which packages you have installed within your Angular application. You will see three directories. The first one is E2E. E2E is just for end-to-end testing, and it's out of scope for this particular workshop. The second one is node modules. It's everything that's in here is reflected in here, and this contains all the files and folders of the packages that you have that Angular needs, and it's basically installed them within your application. Please don't change in your node modules, because usually anytime that you have to update a package or install, uninstall those packages, make any changes, the changes that whoever developed this package will be reflected, and any of the changes that you made will disappear, and it will cause conflicts that you don't need. So if you need to change something within a package, just try to do it in your own application and just don't do anything in the node modules. The most important folder for you, and the folder that you would probably be using the most, is going to be your SRC module. The SRC module contains the entire application that you will be developing on. Once you open the SRC, you will also see a bunch of files and folders, but this is the meat of your application. The first and most important file, well, one of the most important files that are there is the main.ts. The main.ts file is the entry point for your application, and it compiles everything, and it bootstraps the root module, which in this case is our app module, to run your application in the browser. The second file that I think is, well, I don't think, the second file that actually is very important is index.html. We said that Angular helps you develop single-page applications, and this is your single page. So you can just see the the normal HTML tags, all of the elements in there. The only element that might be different or strange to you is app root. It is not a normal HTML tag. It is actually something that Angular uses, and I'm going to show you where that is and how this changes into your entire application. The last thing before we enter into the directories is the styles.css. It's empty right now, but this particular styles.css file is used for global styling, and if you want to import any other files that you want your entire application to take styles from. Every component has its own style sheet, but this is particularly useful for something that you want to apply inside of your entire application, so for example, like fonts. To get into the directories that are within your app, within your SRC folder, you'll see something called environments. Environments is useful, for example, when you are developing on different environments. So when you're developing for production, you usually also have development for testing purposes. And in environments, in case, for example, in dev and prod, development and production, you want to use different API calls or different API endpoints to retrieve your data, or you would like to retrieve data from local files instead of from an API when you're developing either locally or in development, you can define these changes inside of environments. You have assets. Assets contain static files. So if you have images, if you have fonts as well, you would put them inside of assets, because assets is, it does not change when the build happens. Everything inside of assets stays as is whenever it's built. So the files are exactly where you expect them. But if you develop them in, if you add your files inside of anywhere inside of app or anywhere near your components, you might find that those files are disappearing while you're trying to get them. So in case you ever want to use images, put them in assets. And also, again, 99% of your work when you are developing Angular is going to be inside of the app folder. The app folder contains multiple, well, actually no, it's not just in the app folder. You can create multiple other folders, but right now the most important folder for us to look at is app. We are going to go over every file in here as well. So basically, you will see that you have the app module, which in this case, and in most cases, whenever a new Angular application is created, you'll find the app module. The app module contains everything like the files and, it defines the root module, and it tells Angular how to start your application. In this case, we tell it that our Bootstrap component is app component. So which means basically Angular, when you start this application, the first component that I want you to show is app component. And this is app module, and we saw that one in main.ts. So main.ts will look at app module. It will see that it's bootstrapping app component, and the first thing that it will show is going to be the app component, which is over here. Inside this, you'll see a very, very simple file right now, but a lot of things are happening in the background. We discussed metadata before when we were inside of the slides, and basically the app component is what's called a decorator, and it is the one that actually has all the metadata and knows what to do with it. So the metadata that Angular uses in this, when it comes to components in particular, is a selector, which if you notice now is app root for this one, and it has the template URL and the style URLs. So the app root here is basically when you say that this is the selector, Angular looks at this, it sees that, oh, this component has this selector. So whenever I go over the HTML files and I find app root, what I'm supposed to do is look at this template, which is over here, and style it with this one. So I will go into index.html. So Angular is looking over here. It will find app root, and it will know that instead of app root, what I'm supposed to have is anything inside of this file, which is a normal HTML file, a very big normal HTML file. Finally, we have app routing, and inside of here is where you create the map of your application. This is just a high level of everything, all of the files that are essential for you to know when it comes to starting developing with Angular. Let's just do a couple of tests, see how they change our application and how we can actually create our own components as well as our own groups. So right now, this file is what we're seeing over here. It is appcomponent.html. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase everything. And instead of having this amazing landing page, I'm going to strip it down and just have hello. And I'm going to save. What you'll see is down here inside of my terminal is it is building again. What Angular does while you're developing in it is it watches your files. And when it sees that a file has changed, it immediately rebuilds the files that it saw a change in, and it serves it again. So now instead of having that amazing page, we just have hello. Now, we talked about property binding before, and I'm just going to show you how that works. Inside of this app.component.ts, we have the title, My First App. Now, I want to put that title inside of my page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to use what is called interpolation. And that's basically just this notation, those curly braces together. You are interpolating when you're using them. And I just put title in here, I save, and when I go back, once it stops building and it's done, I go in here and I find my first app, which is the title that I have. So it saw that there was a change, that there was something inside of my component. When I changed what was going on inside of app.component.html, it detected the change and it showed me what is present inside of app.component.html. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you how you can create your own component using the Angular CLI. I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new, what's it called, a new terminal, because I don't like to use the same one, and I like to keep the application running. So I'm just going to do ng, and I'm going to do C, which means, no, sorry, I'm going to do G, which means generate, so I can write this as well. But the shorthand is just using G, C, which means component, and it can also be written this way, but again, shorthand, NGGC, and I'm going to call my new component first. No need for uppercase. We're going to wait because my PC is amazing. Okay, so you'll see the output down here, and you'll find that it created a couple of files inside of a folder, and you will find it inside of app. You'll open this, and you'll find all of the files created. If we visit the first.component.ts, what we'll find is a very similar, if not exactly the same structure as, well, no, it is exactly the same structure as the app component.ts. But in this case, we have app first. You'll also see that there were other changes. There was a change module.ts. Every time that you create a component inside of Angular, you're supposed to declare it in a module. And in this case, it was declared inside of app module. So you'll see it over here. It's now Angular knows that it's somewhere. So it sees that inside of app module, it has something called first component. And when it goes to first component, it will see that it has this selector. So let's try this out. We saw that our selector is called app first. Close it. And we have it in here. Let's see what to expect. So we expect now, once I save everything, that we are going to have title, which is my first app, and app first. I'll save it. I'll go back to the other terminal, and I'll see that it finished compiling. So what I'll go, and hopefully it'll show up. Did it show up? Did I save? Oh, there it is. So my first app first works because now when Angular goes into app.component.html, it sees that it has app first. It looks inside of modules to see if it has anything declared that has this selector. It will find app first, and it will replace it with whatever is inside of the template, which in our case is first works. Now, another way that we can do this is we can use routing. So instead of hard coding that I want app first to be here, I can tell Angular that I want to have a router outlet here, which basically means when you see router outlet, what I want you to do is I want you to find the routing map, which is over here. And I want you to find whatever is being requested inside of LBox and map it to a component that I have. So we are going to create the first entry in our map. What it's going to be is we have to define the path, and we'll just call it first in this case. And we need to tell it which component to use. And we are going to ask for first component. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to save. Nothing's going to change. Oh, actually, something is going to change. Okay, Control S. Everything is saved. We have a router outlet. We have app first. And we have a new route defined here. And this module is being imported inside of our root module over here. So now, when we go in here, we're not going to see any changes. But if we do \first, we're supposed to see first works twice. So now if we go in here, we'll go in app.component.html. We find that we have one hard-coded app first, and we have one router outlet where when it looked at first, it went into the app routing module. It found this route that's being requested. It found the component that it needs to put inside the router outlet, and it changed it. So that's basically what's going on. One thing that I would like to show you as well is where exactly is the main.ts showing up inside of our application. So if we go in here, we go into sources. Oh, actually, this is basically our index.html. All right. Leave it here. If we go to my first app, it's elements. So basically, you go in here. This is your index.html, which is this guy down here. And what Angular did is it added all of these scripts at the bottom. So it compiled and built the main.js, and then it took it and it put it down here. And it puts it as main.js, which actually allows for all of the functionality that we're seeing over here. And just to show you what I was talking about in terms of the, let's say, the pipes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pipe uppercase so that we just have our title look. That's not uppercase. So we have our title looking all caps in here. Wait for it for a second. And that is basically it. And I would say that we have covered everything for today. I will open now the floor for any questions that anyone might have.
We have some questions in the chat, so if you could take a look there.
Yes, I will take a look now. Hold it up. Okay. Does it support all CSS frameworks? It supports the frameworks that are showing in here. Right there. CSS, SCSS, SAS, and Stylus. Okay. Next question. Bash or terminal? I'm using terminal, or command prompt on Windows. Yeah. True, PowerShell as well. Does it take you to a new page or still the same page? It never takes you to a new page because it's a single page application. You're always only changing because you're always only changes of the application. Angular versus React, who wins and why? Neither wins. It depends on your team. This question, I'm always prepared for it. And the answer is, it depends. It really does. The differences between them, I would say, is just certain out-of-the-box functionality, and one of them is lighter than the other. But usually it depends on your team. It depends on their skills. And at the end of the day, your user experience is the most important thing. So the framework that you use doesn't really matter. I would always go for Angular because it's what I'm used to. But if I have to use React, I have no problem switching. And also, in case someone is trying to, let's say, figure out what they should start learning, my advice for that is look at the market. So if the market is employing more for Angular, I highly recommend you study that. If the market that you want to work in is employing more for React, go for that. So I don't think anyone wins in particular. What software did you use to type in the commands? I just used my terminal. Okay, the terminal inside of Visual Studio Code. Can I build a desktop app with Angular? I think you can use it with Electron, but I haven't tried it. But I think Electron can help you build desktop apps with Angular. Can you please send us the recording? Maria, that goes back to you. What is CSS? It's cascading style sheets, and it allows you to style your application. What is SCSS, and is it similar to CSS? Yes, in the same way that TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, SCSS is a superset of CSS. Basically, it compiles down to CSS at the end. It just offers different functionalities in the sense that instead of writing classes chained together or using the classic child notation, usually the child notation is I'm going to send it in the chat because for some reason, I'm blanking. I don't know what to call it. You usually use that, and you have the child. But when it comes to SCSS, you could just put them inside of each other, and it compiles down to what CSS would normally be. What is a good backend to use with AngularJS? Basically, it doesn't really matter. It also depends on your team. The backend that you're most comfortable with, because at the end of the day, your front end is only going to use the backend is only the front end is only going to use the API, and the front end has zero visual, like what's it called? It has zero visibility on what's actually going on in the backend, so it doesn't really matter what backend you use. Could you re-explain what you said about dependency injection? Yes. Dependency injection is part of Angular that's basically you see the injector, which is kind of like a box that contains all of your services. And instead of just defining it every single time, creating new from it every single time, you have it stored somewhere. You have an instance of it stored somewhere inside of your application. And you would just write the name of your service inside of the constructor in your component. Angular will look inside of that box, which is the injector, find the service that has the name that you requested, and you can use that immediately instead of doing new service name every time. What is next in terms of learning Angular, in terms of roadmap for learning? Basically, what I would recommend is creating your own modules. You get deeper into the routing, nesting components into each other. I would say the lifecycle hooks and events inside of the Angular, actually the HTML. Do you recommend any specific tutorial to learn Angular? Any specific tutorial? To be very honest, I learned it on the job, so I don't think I have very good particular resources, but there are a lot of really good YouTube videos on it. What is TypeScript used for? TypeScript is used for, TypeScript is just a typed version of JavaScript. It's safer than JavaScript in the sense that it checks types for you before it gets into runtime, and it removes the risks that JavaScript used to come with because it was just var. So now those things that might be like those things that might switch, let's say, types in the middle of development, you're protected from that. So you could use TypeScript for that. So Angular basically has the same purpose of Ajax, but easier. It has a lot more to do. Ajax is replaced by only one part of Angular. What Angular is basically used for is to ease development and make it much faster and out of the box so that you can focus on the important parts of your application instead of having to get into the nitty-gritty of some things that are very common or very, they happen to be used very, very often. So it just kind of abstracts the stuff that you don't need to focus on and allows you to have more time to develop the functionality and the features of your application. Do you recommend Angular IDE for working on such applications? Any Angular? I use Visual Studio Code as an IDE for Angular, and I think it's very good. This is the one that is that I see most common, even when I watch or see anyone else using Angular. Do you recommend any specific? No. Do you have any? Do you advise learning Django also? When it comes to learning things, I advise check the market, because it's constantly changing, and whether you want immediate employment or you want to focus on what you love, it depends on, that's what you learning depends on. So is dependency injection like a singleton factory? I can't confirm or deny that, because I don't want to tell you, I don't want to misinform you. I cannot give you a very definitive answer on this. I'm getting an error message in app.component.check.cs saying cannot find name. Spec is a testing file. If you're just getting the squiggly lines and it's just telling you that there's an error, you could just ignore it, because it won't affect the compiler, the compiling in the build. Can we use TS on the server side as well as JS? Yes, you can, with Node. Yeah, I guess this is all of the questions. Did I miss a question? I don't think so. All right. You guys can let me know if you have any more questions. And I'm just going to grace you with this page. So make sure that you guys follow DSC everywhere to keep informed about any other, what's it called, any other events. Welcome. And yeah.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We'll have the recording up on YouTube, and we will share links with everyone who registered through the Google form. Any more last questions? I see a few things coming in.
Ionic is,
okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically Ionic uses the Angular framework, but it makes the applications hybrid so that you can actually use it on mobile. Yeah, that's what I have for that.
Okay, cool. So in case there aren't any questions, we will end this meeting now. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Alaa, for this wonderful workshop.
Thank you, guys.
Do follow DSC on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. If you're an AB student, we have a WhatsApp group, so do connect with us so we can add you to the WhatsApp group. And have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.